Elizabeth, you asked the question. You said the onset. I mean, this is getting into intonation. I mean, there's a number of ways of analysing intonation, and one of them, and probably pedagogically the most useful one, was by a pair of phoneticians called O'Connor and Arnold in the 1960s. And they tried to analyse English. Other people have done it since then. There's a man called David Brazil who did it in Birmingham University, and there are some other people in the States who invented a system called Toby. But from a pedagogical point of view, I think the O'Connor and Arnold system is still the best, and it's the one that John Wells uses in his book on intonation as well. And they break the intonational phrase up into it. He says any intonational phrase, any group of words has to have a nuclear pitch change on it. That's the absolute bottom line. And then sometimes in longer ones, you're going to get something happening earlier on than that, which is called the onset. But I really don't think. If you're interested, John Wells has written a very clear book about it, or you can get stuff on the web about it. But it's it's not kind of a key. The essential thing is the idea of a nuclear pitch change. If your students get the idea of a stress pattern and then one of the syllables having a nuclear pitch change, then wow, they're going to be about 99% of the way there.
That's good.
Now, I've done all the talking. What I'm going to do now is invite any other questions or comments or anything else. We can launch a discussion topic otherwise, but it'd be jolly good if anybody has anything they wanted to bring. It was very nice to hear that from Robert in the States, from Atlanta. Is there anything else here? Donal is typing. Mama is in bed with a hot water bottle, or would like to be in bed with a hot water bottle, but is very professional. Joining us instead.
Well, we might come up with something better than a hot water bottle.
Oh, and hot brandy, my goodness. Okay.
Oh, and hot brandy.
Right. I'm wondering if you're going to be writing a question. If you're not going to be writing a question, I'm going to launch a slightly different question. But I'm just going to give you a moment to see if you do actually write a question.
Yes. What we want to do is answer your questions before we toss out ours. So if you do have any, please send them in.
Okay, it helps with window stress. Sorts of levels of stress. Well, they're both stressed, but one is more prominent. Yes, now I assume you're talking about the word window, Donal. And in our analysis, we wouldn't say that the second syllable of window is stressed. They've both got full vowels in them. Undoubtedly, there's no reduced vowel there. Window. But we would, I think, regard window as being two full vowels, the first syllable of which is stressed.
Yes. Actually, there's an example of that. We put a video up today. We're absolutely ashamed of ourselves because this video was part of week 4 last time round, and this time it should be part of week 2, and we forgot to put it in. So our apologies to everyone who got caught up in this little mess up. Ahmed in particular, I think he's gone, in fact, but yes, he was one of them. And and in that, the word window is actually in this, so you'd be able to see what I personally do when I'm teaching. She opened the window, for example. That's the example given, and it's shown as a full vowel, unstressed.
Now, Donal has said the syllable has less stress. You said Hess, but I'm guessing that's less. Please tell me if I'm wrong. Has something stress, but it may be the consonant that has the oomph or onset. In the window. The consonant has the oomph. Window. It's certainly true that stress is something which is applied to a syllable as such. So we're not, although it typically, when phoneticians look at the so-called stress pulse, the moment when the stress pulse is at its peak, it typically occurs close to the beginning of a vowel. So if you took a syllable like cat and you asked where the rhythmic beat, where was the center of the rhythmic beat in cat, it'd be just as the vowel starts being produced. But the stress as a whole applies to the whole syllable. And this is the reason why when you get a stressed syllable beginning with a P, for example, that P becomes aspirated. The P itself picks up, some of the stress gets applied to the initial P becomes aspirated, whereas an initial P in an unstressed syllable, so if you take the word pepper, for example, the first P of pepper is going to be aspirated because it's where the stress pulse happens. The second P, the second and third, or the two Ps in the middle of pepper, will be unaspirated because there's no stress pulse associated with them. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, though, Donal. By all means, type in and ask elaborate on what you're asking if I haven't answered.
And the others, please feel free to just speak. You've all got microphones there. A couple have turned your microphones off, but you can turn them back on again. And
I tell you what, while people are typing, I'm going to launch a discussion topic because it is a topic of active research for us, which is the issue, and we're going to return to this in week 4. And the issue is to what extent people can learn good pronunciation in a foreign language by so-called listen-first approaches. So what we call listen-first approaches would be listen and repeat, which is the classic sort of exercise. The teacher provides a model and the class echoes it back, doing their best. And we also people have become dissatisfied with that, and so they tend to do sort of sensitization exercises around that. So they tend to work on people's hearing. People say, well, they couldn't hear it, therefore we'll work on their hearing. So there is an approach to teaching pronunciation which says, all right, we're going to do some exercises which tries to improve people's hearing. We'll try to tell them something about where their tongue should be, but the actual core teaching exercise is still listen to this model and now try and produce something in response. And Ros and I call that listen and say, on the basis that saying is a more considered act than just repeating, sort of mindless repetition, or instinctual repetition, or reflex repetition is the word I'm looking for, versus a conscious act of saying as a result of having done these sensitization exercises. But both of those two approaches would be what we call listen-first approaches. And I don't want to prejudge this, but did you, as a group of teachers, and we've got a sample of about 10 people on this call, do you feel that you have learned the pronunciation of an L2 to a high standard via a listen-first approach? And the answer could be yes or could be no, but just in terms of you personally, what do you think the answer is? Robert said no. Anna Reba said no, not yet. All right, fair enough, Anna. I wonder if English is the L2 you're thinking about, or whether there's another language you're thinking about. Jane, that's an interesting response. You said, I learnt my L2 by living in the country. Can you dig down a bit deeper and say, what were the activities that led you to pronounce? I mean, pronunciation is the key, is obviously our subject today. If you sort of introspect a bit about what were the things which happened where you actually improved your pronunciation, where you felt, oh, today I'm actually speaking whatever the language was a little bit better. Living in the country is too vague. We need to have a better understanding of exactly what activities really do help.
Yes, exactly. I have memories of our Spanish concierge where I used to work, and he had been in the country for 40 years, and everyone dreaded meeting him because nobody could understand him. He really spoke what he thought was French and what we thought was Spanish. He was speaking Spanish with French words popped in. And so he was there for 40 years without picking up the language. So what was he not doing that somebody who did it well did? Mm-hmm.
All right, Mama, thank you for that. That's very interesting to hear that listen and repeat worked for many of the sounds, but when the sound was completely different, you needed some different sort of help.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Learned Italian formally, but by the sound of it, people are very happy with your pronunciation.
Mm-hmm.
And you were living in the country. You've obviously lived in the country a long time. You say listening for 25 years, but I suspect your pronunciation was probably pretty good fairly early on. You have a southern Italian accent. My goodness, all right. Natalia says, I've looked to listen and repeat exercises. You did read a lot about articulation. Which one helped you most? Very good question. Yes, it's hard to disentangle it. I think so. You do live in the south, Jane. Okay. Right. The reason we asked the question is, I'll explain the reason we asked the question. The reason we asked the question is because there are undoubtedly people who are able to learn by listen-first approaches. And what we want to find out is why some people can and why some people can't. We are guessing, our best guess at the moment is that between 5 and 15% of people are okay learning pronunciation by hearing a model and trying to match it. And we think that they're doing something a little bit similar to what a visual artist does. So somebody who wants to copy a drawing. Some people can do it well, some people can do it not so well. If you've come across a book called Drawing on the Right Side, is it Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, Ros? Drawing on the Left Side of the Brain. It's by a woman called Betty Edwards.
No, on the right side of the brain.
Drawing on the right side of the brain. One of the exercises, this is a book teaching you how to draw better. one of the exercises she proposes is to take a line drawing and to try to copy it right way up, and then turn the drawing around and try to copy the drawing when it's been inverted the wrong way around, and to see which, if you're trying to make just a straight copy of a line drawing, which gives a better result. And the interesting thing one discovers is that, in fact, you get a better result when you can't see what the drawing is, when you're just literally seeing the lines as lines rather than seeing the lines as making up a hand or whatever. And it's that kind of dispassionate seeing things as they really are, which helps people, as opposed to what they represent, which helps people copy line drawings. And similarly with sounds, it seems that some people are able not to hear, they're presented with somebody speaking in a foreign language, and they're able to put aside their normal linguistic, the part of their mind that automatically interprets that as linguistic sounds, and which will then turn it into something, recognize them, the sounds as being sounds of their own first language, if you like, and are able to hear those L2, that string of L2 speech as just noises. So they stop hearing it from a linguistic filter and just hear it as the noises the person is making. And at that point, it seems that they can start matching the noises they're hearing with the noises they themselves make. And that's matching, they can then do that auditory matching to target process and get a reasonable result from just being presented with a model and trying to copy it. So that's our working hypothesis. Now, we've thrown that out. Could somebody, perhaps, thank you, Anna, for putting that link in the thing. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts about that, whether that chimes with anybody's experience, whether the idea of hearing a sound as a noise and then copying a noise as opposed to copying a sound is something anybody's found themselves doing. And of course, if this question goes...
It's David.
Yes.
Yes, David.
Perhaps I can just give a little feedback here from a slightly different angle. I'm completely new to teaching English. Never taught it. I'm currently doing a training to learn how to teach, so to speak. But I'm a very experienced teacher. All my adult life, I've taught sport and fitness, and so this physical approach I find very interesting. Because obviously I come from a physical approach background in teaching sport and fitness, so the exercise, the Shall We Dance exercise relating to dancing completely connected with me. So my question is, or suggestion is here, does this all come down to your learning styles? Using the VAC learning system, visual, audio and kinesthetic. If you're more of a audio person, you're going to learn better with a listen and repeat approach, whereas if you're more of a kinesthetic person, you're going to learn better with the more physical approach. Is it just as simple as that, perhaps?
Personally, I doubt it's as simple as that, but I can certainly believe that there's something in that. And when you say that you're an audio person, when what I just described about somebody who's able to hear sounds in quite a dispassionate way and not immediately jump to interpreting them within their L1, then yes, if somebody was an audio person, when they've done tests on whether musicians are better at learning pronunciation or non-musicians, they found in general that musicians are better. And then they dig down a bit deeper and they find that it's not just musicians. In fact, musicians who only play instruments aren't very much better, whereas musicians who sing are much better. So, you can dig down into the stuff. I suspect that singers are people who have the double advantage of, one, being much more aware of their vocal apparatus, so much more aware of what they do with themselves. And secondly, they tend to hear more dispassionately what it is that they're producing, what it is that other people around them are doing. So it's hard to disentangle. But I'm sure if somebody is an auditory learner, I'm a bit of a skeptic of these things, but I'd have to know a bit more about what was meant by an auditory learner. I suspect that means that people learn by hearing things or having things said to them rather than seeing things or doing. And pronunciation, it's still a motor activity. I don't know. Is the answer.
I'm not a very good person. If I go to an event and I'm being lectured to from the front of the classroom, I just don't take things in. It just goes over my head. I might as well not be there. Whereas if I can be actively involved, then that's how I learn. I'm going back like over 30 years. At one stage in my life, I was a trampoline coach. Now that just thought came into my mind. I've got children jumping on a trampoline, and I can ask them to, I can start teaching them rotation, leading up to eventually a somersault. And some of them you can just give them a prompt, and they'll do what you ask them. But others will have absolutely no clue. You've actually got to get on the trampoline physically and perhaps push their hips forward to give them an idea that this is how you create rotation. And once you've done that, so they've physically experienced it and they've kind of connected with it, with their hips, then it begins to start happening.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would like
one of the points actually one of the problems with these sessions
is Elizabeth is trying to put a word in.
Far away, Elizabeth.
No, there were just two things I would like to say. What David was just saying, what Robert was just saying, was running around in my mind to say that some people have natural abilities. Everyone has abilities more in one field than in another, and you can see it with everyone, and that's where you see the point in teaching, because I have people who give really quite excellent presentations before I start to teach them how to make a presentation. Others are useless at the beginning, and yes, we can help those people. So yes, for some people it is a natural ability, I think. And another point, which what you were saying, but a different point, is about the sounds first. I had a fantastic experience of my French grandson at the age of 3 or 4, spending 2 weeks with his English-speaking cousins, and then he said, I can speak English, and just made the English sounds. He had no words. I have a very short video I can show you. And the amazing thing was, when I watched the video of him making blah, blah, blah sounds, which I heard, when I watched the video, there are words in it. So, you know, for this child, it was very clearly the sounds. Very, very clearly.
Can I say something? What I would say there is that then what he'd probably done is happened across the English articulatory position and was kind of speaking French with the English articulatory position, and it wouldn't surprise me if some English words therefore dropped out of his mouth. I think there's an interesting video that I've got on my Facebook Clear Pronunciation page, which somebody sent me, of an Italian singer singing in English. Well, it's actually singing in American English, except he's not actually, he's just talking double Dutch or whatever the Italian equivalent of double Dutch is. But it sounds like American English. And it's the same kind of idea, I think, Elizabeth. It's very, very amusing. And you kind of have to do a double take or whatever the auditory equivalent of a double take is, because you think he's actually singing in English, and then you realize it's just blah. But it just sounds incredibly convincing. So,
yes.
And the other thing I was going to say is that, which is just picking up on comments by Natalia and Alex and also Mama Quinn, which is that I think that people can, especially people. I mean, I'm a singer, and I probably pick up the sounds quite quickly of Greek and other Southern European languages that are kind of vaguely related to languages that I already speak. But if I stumbled across a phoneme that was different, I probably wouldn't produce it very well, because I wouldn't have a clue how to produce it in many cases. And I think that's what somebody said. I think Natalia said that about the R, or somebody did that. You know, there will be phonemes that are so alien that you really won't have a clue how to go about producing them, and then you do need help. And sometimes you can produce something in the classroom almost by accident, but you don't really know how you got to it. And if you don't have the sort of understanding of what's happening from a physical point of view, then you probably won't be able to do that independently. So in a controlled situation with listen and repeat, you might. But then when you go home, you won't be able to do that, because you won't have been consciously producing it. You'll have kind of just produced it, as I say, by happenstance, really. So I still don't think it really works terribly well, but it does depend a bit on the person, in my experience.
I'm going to suggest that we actually change the subject in as much as, for the reasons that we're going to come back to this question again in week 4 when we start dealing with sounds. And in some ways, it will make more sense for some of the people who are on this call if they've never come across a purely articulatory approach to how sounds get taught. Some of this might sound a bit academic. What we're going to be showing in week 4 is that the teacher can be absolutely silent and can teach sounds. And I think that would be a useful contribution to the discussion. So what I'm going to do is make a completely, be the dictator of this conversation and instead move on to a different question, which was that Natalia and Alex asked a question up here somewhere, which was, what do you think of the ELF approach to pronunciation, which is minimal in our opinion? Now, while I start off answering, Natalia and Alex, I wonder if you could just type in and say what you mean by minimal there. I think I know what you mean, but it'd be good if you could clarify that. While you're doing that, I'm just going to explain for people who don't know what ELF stands for. It stands for English as a Lingua Franca. And what I think Natalia and Alex are asking about is a proposal made by a woman called Jennifer Jenkins about 15 years ago, which was to find a model of pronunciation for English that wasn't RP, wasn't British RP, wasn't General American, got rid of some of the things that she felt unnecessarily complicated or made English unnecessarily difficult to pronounce, but retained the essential parts of English pronunciation so that it could be used as a lingua franca, as a way in which people could communicate among themselves successfully. And this has been quite a controversial proposal. Lots of people said it's great, lots of people said it isn't great. And the question we're being asked is what we think about it. And so I'm going to say something. I know Ros has got some things to say about it. Carrie probably has some views about it, but I'm going to start. And I'm going to say that one of the things about it, which surprised and I was quite pleased to see in it, it is much more demanding than I thought it would be. I don't know, when Ros starts talking, I'll go off and get the link to what the ELF stands for, because I've got it on my computer somewhere. But it's not completely dumbed down. We're not talking about some sort of pidgin English, and we're not talking about a sort of me Tarzan you Jane or the equivalent of me Tarzan you Jane for pronunciation. It's quite a demanding standard of pronunciation, but with some things relaxed. So having made that point, I'm going to hand over to Ros, and in the meantime, I'm going to go away and get the link to ELF so that everybody can see what ELF does actually involve. Ros, over to you. What do you think about ELF?
Yes, my feeling about pronunciation in general, and this applies to ELF, which is English as a lingua franca, just in case anyone doesn't know what it means, is that when I teach, I want to give my students the opportunity of being absolutely excellent. Who knows in my class whether somebody doesn't want to become an English teacher? And if they do, they'll need excellent pronunciation. So I don't think I have the right to dumb anything down. I think I have to present them with the possibility of being absolutely perfect if they put the work in. That's their job. It's not my job. I can't do that for them. It's the same, if you like, as coaching trampoline, for example. You can do what you can do, but if they want to be really good, if they want to be in the Olympic Games with trampoline now that exists, well, then they just have to do it until they can do it to Olympic standards. And pronunciation is exactly the same. I need to keep the way open for people to be able to do this to Olympic standards. That's to say, to speak really, really well, if that's what they want to do. So I would be against this kind of thing. I don't think it's a good idea at all. Simply, I don't think it's, I'm tempted to say I don't think it's ethical. Right? Because I don't think we should be giving students anything less than the very best that they are willing to take up. I shouldn't in any way teach so that my students are blocked. I don't know whether you know, there's an article that I think we've put on in the resources by two people called Higgs and Clifford. And these two people wrote this article. It's called The Push Towards Communication in 1982, I think. And what they were saying was that, this is a long time ago, 1982. What they were saying was that in their circumstances, they were teaching diplomats. And in their circumstances, they had people coming in on a 5-level scale. They had people coming in who had just picked the language up, either in a community class or off the street. And these people were blocked at level 2 or 2+. And so they called this group of people Terminal 2+, because they were stuck at that level. What they could do is expand their English, but they couldn't take their English to level 3, to level 4, and to level 5. And of course, for diplomats, this was really a pity. But they had so many ingrained problems that they just were not able to do it. Now, I don't think we have the right to do that, in fact. I think we need to leave the way open to level 5 for everybody who comes into our class. So that answers several questions at the same time, I think. But
Rose,
Rose,
I was distracted because I was getting the link, and I'm not sure if you made the. Did you explain why you felt they did? Why the Terminal 2s were blocked? That it was because they weren't getting any feedback and proper correction. Did you explain that?
No, I didn't explain that, but that's correct. This is why they were blocked. They were blocked because they were allowed to get away with murder in the classroom. Actually, they would say more or less anything, and the teacher was so happy that somebody had actually said something that the teacher, wow, yes, fantastic. And so they were allowed to speak badly and picked up so many habits, bad habits, that they got themselves completely blocked with fossilized bad habits. Now, it is possible to go beyond fossilized habits, but it's extremely difficult. I mean, what a pity not to just do the job properly from the very beginning. So whenever I teach a course of any kind, we start with pronunciation, and I work on pronunciation in a concentrated way for a certain time, probably something like 3 hours. And then after that, interspersed all the way through the class, I want every sentence to be well said until people know what a well said sentence is. After that, they learn to do it for themselves. So that is what I would do in pronunciation.
But at no point, Rose, if I could summarize that, at no point do you not give feedback. If pronunciation is not good, you will give feedback. So at no point does somebody go away thinking mistakenly, I've done it right, and start fossilizing some sort of an error.
Right, right. And actually, I do work within a model of learning where I know when people are, let's just say, I think I know how people learn. And in this model of learning, I have the possibility of saying, this person right now is fossilizing something, is making something automatic, which shouldn't be because it's not correct. And so I can bring them back to the previous stage, which is, I have to work on it with their presence so that they know, so I can tell them what they should be doing. I can tune what they're doing until it's correct, and then I can let it become automatic because it's correct. Mm-hmm.
Carrie, I noticed you put a question into the chat box. I was about to ask if you had an opinion on EFL, and it looks like you had a question on EFL.
Because I've read quite a lot about it, but I'm still not really clear. I think there might be some mistakes in that ELF Pron description, especially on the vowel front. I mean, it's not one thing, is it? Is it English as lingua franca? I mean, what is it? How do you define it? How dumbed down is it? What's missing and what isn't?
I think actually their summary isn't a bad summary of it. It's ELF, of course, rather than EFL. It's ELF.
Sorry, yeah.
Jenkins,
yeah.
She's now I think she's now abandoned. I think she got so fed up with all the controversy that she's actually stopped writing about it. She's moved to other things. But she defined what she called the English as a lingua franca core, and
yeah,
I'm pretty sure that link I sent actually is an accurate description of what the English as a lingua franca is. So I think that's reliable. But it's a book chapter. She actually wrote it up in a book chapter, which I don't think is available on the web, or I've never actually seen the chapter available on the web. So we have to rely on other people writing about it.
Because I noticed that one thing in the description that she makes a point about is consistency. And I think that's one of the major issues that we get with people who are not particularly keen on or not prioritizing, shall we say, RP or, Southern Standard English or whatever we want to call it, and end up with a real mixture which kind of reflects the ecosystem, shall we say, of the English that they've acquired over the years. So they had a Scottish teacher for a term, then they had then they did a course which had a lot of Australian accents in it, then they had an American teacher, and and then they did an intensive course in Ireland, and and you end up with this kind of weird vowel system mainly, which is a real mishmash. And and I seem to spend quite a lot of my time unraveling that kind of thing. I mean, it's not so bad with consonants, whether somebody's maybe you know, T voicing and saying butter instead of butter, and maybe not even so bad if they're adopting a rhotic R, you know, computer, but it's the vowel sounds that seem to be all over the place quite often. You know, I'm always getting students who say I can't actually tell whether they're saying I can or I can't because it's all can, sort of, you know.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where we tend to get the problems. Really, I'm not really that worried about you know, English as lingua franca, except I probably don't really understand exactly what it is and where it differs from RP, maybe. But it's the consistency of vowel sounds that concerns me, and I don't know how much that's allowed in English as lingua franca, except that Jennifer Jones seems to make a point of saying that is actually really quite important. That there is consistency.
I've got a feeling that Jennifer Jenkins suggested that that the students should master the complete vowel inventory. So I don't think she's suggesting that any vowels can be merged with other vowels, and I'd be amazed if she did suggest that.
Yes.
Now Jane,
Question.
by the sound of it, Jane knows more about it than we do, because Jane has correctly pointed out that Robin Walker, who's somebody who we know, has written about ELF. And the workload on the student is considerably reduced in ELF, Carrie. Okay, fair enough, Jane. If you, I don't know if you want to join us, Jane. If you've got the microphone right, Jane. So if you switched your microphone on, which is on the top bar, and wanted to butt in and actually tell us a bit about your experience with ELF or your feelings about ELF, you'd be very welcome to do so.
Mm-hmm.
We can't hear you at the moment. Okay, perhaps you don't have a microphone with you, or
I think Jane said sometime earlier that she didn't want to say anything. I don't know where that was. Way back up at the beginning. Elizabeth has made a remark, which is an interesting one. What if they only want to trampoline enough to enjoy themselves? Well, of course. And what if somebody wants to learn English just to be able to communicate? Well, of course. But that's not how I should carry on my class, in actual fact. If I've got 20 people in the class, there might be 18 like that, but there might be somebody who wants to actually learn English. And so I should teach my class as if so that person can learn English. Then if the others don't want to give themselves the trouble, that's fine too. The other thing is, it can all be you can work on this for years, in actual fact. Pronunciation is something that might take a very long time to learn, like golf or like anything else, any other motor skill. And it's a motor skill that's very particular because it's one where you can't actually see what's going on. Just imagine trying to teach a blind person to play golf. Well, it's more or less that we're doing. You can see what the lips are doing. You can see perhaps a little bit what the tongue is doing. But what's happening further inside the mouth is absolutely invisible. So, you know, we have this problem as well.
And perhaps I could add
one other. I
don't
want to go off topic, but it ties.
Sorry, I'll just add one thing on that same topic of what standard one demands of students in the classroom. One other thing which we see very often is that students come into a class. Obviously, they've learned English in other classes. Very few people get complete beginners coming into their classes these days. So students come in and they've had bad experiences learning pronunciation. And so from that point of view, they are very unconfident about their ability to improve. And so what I think, well, certainly what Ros and I does, and I suspect Carrie as well, what we certainly do is we give them 2 or 3 hours where we're very demanding. We teach using an articulatory approach. We don't try to get them imitating anything. We get them to free up their muscles, start them to use themselves differently. So at least they have the experience of learning pronunciation in a different way and seeing what it gives in terms of improvement. They have some experience of success in learning pronunciation. If after that period of time, if after 3 or 4 hours of us being quite demanding, getting them to do different things, them having some success, if at that point they think, well, the game isn't worth the candle, you know, I'm 65 years old, I'm never going to pronounce English, this isn't what I want to work on, well, absolutely fine, that's their decision. But as teachers, we have to give them the opportunity, as Rod says, to be as good as they possibly can be. And we have to give them the experience of learning pronunciation in a way that we think is effective before we jointly, between us and them, decide that, in fact, for this student, in fact, doesn't want to spend the time on this and wants to spend the time on something else.
The other thing is, since it's a motor skill and since we're teaching them what they have to do, then they can actually not do it in the class and come back to it some years later. That's possible too. That's something that I did with my French. I started learning French when I arrived in France, and 12 or 13 or 14 years later, I decided that I really wanted to speak very good French. I wanted to do a doctorate, and I decided that on the day I would do my exam at the end, which is an oral exam in front of a jury of 4 people and all the spectators, that I wanted to speak perfect French. And I really set about doing it, and I got my pronunciation really up to scratch. And this is years after I started learning French. So you never give up. There's always the possibility that people will want to come back to it, and for some reason or other decide that they really would like to speak a language well, and that should be available to them from what I've done in my class. The one thing that is very important to me is if I have students for 50 hours, then 50 hours that I have them for is not the end of their learning experience of English. What I want to do is do 2 things. I want to teach them some English, but I also want to teach them how to go out and learn English. And so, that too is part of my job. I want to make them better learners of English. And yes, that's absolutely very important.
Shall we
just dealing with little... Mm-hmm. Go ahead,
I was
Carrie.
going to say, shall we address Natalia's question there? Do you think recording oneself and then listening to the recording to spot bad pronunciation is helpful? Is it something you would recommend to students?
Can I jump in and say something about?
Go ahead.
Rob, you jump.
All right. No, jump in, please.
All right. Okay. If it's something that you are motivated to do yourself, then I think it's a fantastic thing to do. And in fact, in week 5, I hope everybody's with us by week 5. In week 5, we'll be talking about an exercise which was pioneered by in community language learning. I don't know if everybody's heard about this. This was a method which was devised in the 50s and 60s by a man called Curran, who was a priest in Chicago. And in community language learning, they have a thing called human computer, which is when the student says the sentence and the teacher says it afterwards. So the student can compare what they've said to what the teacher has said, but is not allowed to then imitate the teacher, isn't allowed to then copy the teacher. So it's purely an exercise in noticing without there being any repetition. And then after a period of, say, 30 seconds, if the student wants to try and say it again, that's absolutely fine. So it becomes an awareness exercise. The comparison is about awarenesses rather than any sort of imitation or copying or anything like that. And similarly, if you're working on your own English by paying attention to what you sound like, what you think it should sound like, fantastic. You're going to have a string of awarenesses about where your English is good and bad. And that will be very inspirational for improving. But my suspicion is that if you recommend it to students, if they don't know how to work with the recording, and if they're not motivated themselves to do that careful work of comparing the two, I suspect, and if they also don't have any insight into how they might improve, and they're not, they haven't freed up their mouths to actually try different things, because a lot of people come into class and they're absolutely frozen. They're locked within L1. And the first job one has to do is to demonstrate to them they really can make noises which are different from their L1 noises when they're attempting to speak. If students haven't made that conceptual step, then I think saying to them, well, go home, record yourself, listen to it and come back, I think would be a waste of time at that point. It really is a matter of how motivated the students are, how expert they are at doing that listening task, and whether they have the capacity to actually change what they're doing yet, which will come in time, but isn't the case for most students when they come into classes, which I've taught. Sorry, Ross, fire away.
Yes, yes. I'd like to come back to an exercise that was, I think it was this week, which you brought up, which was the 1:45 exercise, where you say 2 and then 2, and people start at 2, and then you put core in front, 1:45, and in my experience with people who have 7 years of school English, they say it 1:45, and it sounds absolutely perfect. And then somebody understands what it is. 1:45, and everyone says, and there we are back to square one, except that their mouths have been saying 1:45 in perfect English. And so I think This is really very important, because at that stage they say, really, is it as small as that? Really, is that what we're talking about? It's not a korte tutu. And so they become aware of just how very, very small a schwa can be. These schwa sounds, which are just absolutely vanishingly small. One of the exercises I give students, I do it with rods, but I'll show you with cars, for example. So imagine that I have my hand stretched out like this as far as I can, and then I say to them, I'm going to give you a test, right? It should be said I say very little in the classroom. So I say, I'm going to give you a test. On one hand, I have my car's blue, and on the other hand, I have my car's blue. So I say, you point to which one you think you hear. So my car's blue, my car's blue. My car's blue, my car's blue. And they point to the one they think they hear. And that I can do with students who have very, very, very little English. Because for me, reduction is absolutely the thing that that students have the most trouble with, because what they do is they think it's a vowel, first of all, which I don't think it is. It's something quite different from a vowel, the schwa sound. And so they try to hear it better, and so they expand it, they make it bigger, they make it louder so that they can actually hear it, and it's not a schwa anymore. And so if working on this system, this means that they actually have the possibility of producing schwa before they know what it is, and they get a sense of how very small it is. And somebody brought up a beautiful example of that today. What was it? Do you remember, Piers? I have a friend. Was it that one? I don't remember exactly what the sentence was, but it was stuttering from in F's, for example. Wife of a friend. That's it. The wife of a friend, right? And so you get friend, the friend, the friend, wife of a friend, and this kind of thing, and you get these tiny, tiny little nothings in there. And so I think these kinds of exercises are extremely useful. Now, once they know what schwa is the key to the whole thing. Once they know what schwa is, then they can learn to hear it. But until and the problem with recording things is people can record things, and there are just all these syllables that just vanish because the people aren't actually hearing them at all. And one of the really important things for me is that students learn to hear all the syllables, because how will they learn the language if they don't have all the syllables? So that's my feeling about it. Wait a minute till I read what people are writing.
Actually, Elizabeth asked something very interesting. Do people actually teach English as lingua franca?
Oh, I think so.
I assume that Robin does, and yes, definitely people do.
Yeah,
Well,
there's a lot of his stuff up on the net, and including some videos. So I'm going to do some investigation there, because I'm getting more and more intrigued as to exactly what it is and how you teach it. And I've not heard him, but obviously Jane has, and Elizabeth has.
Jane has asked a question which is very dear to my heart, which is Catford highly regarded in the prawn world? Since yes. Catford is one of our absolute heroes, what can we say? He was a highly regarded phonetician, Jane. Undoubtedly, he was one of the top phoneticians in his time. He died about 10 years ago. Is he regarded in the prawn world? He was an English teacher. One of his great advantages is he was an English teacher for about 20 or 30 years before he became a professional phonetician, perhaps only 20 years. Rather bizarrely, he spent the Second World War in Athens as an English teacher, supposedly. Now, I can't quite believe that was true. And it couldn't have been the whole time, because Athens was occupied, as far as I know. So he must have got out at some point. I suspect he might have been in SO4 or SOE or MI5 or something, and his English teaching was the cover for that. But that might be completely wrong. But he was an English teacher, so his analysis he wrote about pronunciation with the thoughts of how practical it was to teachers as an English teacher in mind. So was he regarded? He was very highly regarded. Yes, he was very highly regarded in the phonetics world and in the pronunciation world. If he'd only called his book if he'd only written a book called A Practical Introduction to English Pronunciation, he would have sold 10 times as many books, and he would be the most famous author in the world of English pronunciation, we're sure. But he's not that well known anymore, unfortunately.
Yes, and he could have written exactly the same book and called almost exactly the same book and called it a practical introduction to English pronunciation. Absolutely. You see where I keep mine. Mine is just above my head here. Right? I can get it. I can just take it down. Something fell.
One other thing I'm going to tell you about Catford, Jane, is that as a small boy, I mentioned this in one of the responses, but you might have missed it. As a small boy, Catford was interested in steam engines. So he came and he found out all about how steam engines work, so pressures and flows and heat and aerodynamics and all the rest of it. So when he came into phonetics, he was probably he was a sort of a traditional phonetician, but he came to it with an interest in and understanding of aerodynamics. And he therefore really pioneered that whole area of investigation and, came up with some very insightful things which we make use of in this course and elsewhere. So he was an aerodynamics person as well as a phonetician. Well, he was a phonetician who understood speech breeding and aerodynamics in a way that most of them don't. Now then, have we got any other questions that we haven't answered, or that?
Yes, Elizabeth has said we've left ELF behind, though. Is there anything else that about ELF that people would like to bring up?
Okay. I don't think it's kind of relevant. It was. I mean, I really did not want to go off on a thing, but it seems the introduction of ELF was of great interest to change the status of English rather than something you taught. Sorry, but that's just a practitioner at the chalk front.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very interesting proposal. It wouldn't worry me if it happened. It wouldn't worry me particularly. And sort of the materials, the sort of exercises we're doing in this teaching pronunciation differently session, I don't think would be any different if we were teaching, if ELF was the standard English. I don't think there'd be any difference at all. Because what ELF certainly includes is it's not getting rid of the fact that English has stress and reduction. It's not getting rid of the idea that there's a nuclear syllable in every English intonational phrase. It's not, in that sense, it's not changing English dramatically. And really, I think this is true, pretty much everything we're doing on this session, you do identically, even if ELF was one of the standard, it's not yet one of the standard models, but even if ELF had replaced RP and ELF had replaced General American, I think we'd be running a very similar session to what we're doing now.
Any other questions there? Elizabeth says no Catford on Delta. Well, and then who wants to do a Delta?
Okay. Now Natalia is typing.
Jane said that.
I think he means me. I'll have to wait until the holiday break is over. Okay, yes.
Nazi.
It looks like I think.
No, where did Nazi? Ah, yes. I can't wait to do the stuttering technique. Okay, do try it, Natalia. It is just such fun. It's such fun because what you can do is do it with students. They say it. It sounds perfect, and they have no idea what's coming out of their mouths at all. And then somebody gets it, and there's just hysterics. I actually did it with a group of French English teachers down in Aix-en-Provence. I think it was last year. We went from Grenoble down to Aix-en-Provence. Elizabeth will remember that. And down in Aix-en-Provence, there was a whole group of English teachers, and I did it with them. And they just did it, 1:45, and then somebody realized what it was. And these were French English teachers, which just goes to show what their problems are in English. That is, they don't really have much idea of what schwa actually is.
Mm-hmm. Rose, when you introduce them to
one Dylan was made of.
Stop, please, Carrie.
No, I was just saying, Rose, do you write it out in IPA, or do you point it out on the chart, or how do you actually get them to say it?
I use a chart and I point it on the chart. Absolutely.
Yeah. But, so I mean, with students that don't know the, who aren't accustomed to using the chart or don't know IPA, then it's more difficult to get them to actually do it, if you see what I mean.
Well, you see, the thing about it is that it's 1:45. There's so little in it, in actual fact. What you have to have is oo for two. You have to have a T. You have to have the I, and then you have to have what else? the core, right? So that you've only got a few sounds. You've got very few sounds. Another one that you can do is really fun is T for two, right? And so you get them. This is stuttering from one consonant to another. So two for two for two for two, and then T for two. And they're used to saying T for two, and so they, you know, and two for T, and then when it's T for two, and then somebody there gets it. Ah, and then they start to sing it because everyone knows it. And big surprise again. But the thing about it is you don't have to do that for very long before they understand what's going on. And then all I have to say is they make a sentence, some sentence or other. That's I have a lot of free talk in my class. People just talking to each other. I have techniques for doing that. And so they're talking to each other, and somebody says something, and I use finger correction, so I put each word on my fingers like this, and then they work on the sentence if it's necessary, and then I say, now say it in English, and they know what that means. What that means is they now have to put in all the stress reduction and just, you know, get their speech breathing right and actually say it in English. But the first time when somebody says something like, I went into town last week, and it's perfect from a grammatical point of view, and then I say, now say it in English, they are dumbfounded. Oh, I just did. Well, not really. Let's have it now in English, right? And so we work on it and get it into English. Because what I have to leave them with is the skill at the end of the 50 hours or however many hours I have of knowing what to do to an English sentence so that it sounds English. So that's what I'm training them up for. It's at least as important as giving them more English. What I find is that when I teach classes with who've already done English at school, and that's absolutely almost everybody now, what's surprising is that they have such a bad command of the early parts of English, of the functional words in English. They have loads of vocabulary and they just simply can't use it. And so we actually spend a lot of time just getting this non-functional English rolling so that they can actually use it and that it sounds English.
We're coming to the end of our hour. In fact, I think we've come to the end of our hour. There are two things I'm going to comment on. One is, Donal, you made a quite interesting comment there. You said ELF now, I believe, has evolved to us natives selecting appropriate vocabulary and stripping out culture-specific idioms. If you're able to join us on another occasion, Donal, could you repeat that question? We haven't got enough time to deal with it now, or make that comment again, because I think it might be we might have quite a fruitful discussion about the whole issue about cultural norms and appropriate vocabulary and all the rest of it. So do return to that. And Jane, you asked, may I ask why this wonderful course is free? Well, flattery, of course, will get you everywhere. It's free because of all this flattery you're giving us. But the real reason it's free is because we learn so much from doing it, and it prompts us into actually creating materials and all the rest of it. So I promise you, get as much out of this as we hope you are getting. And on that note, the big hand has crossed the 12, at least in my house. So I'm going to.
Exactly. Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.